The obsidian rotunda of the Kynar Ascendancy was not merely a room. It was a sensory deprivation chamber designed to amplify the one sense that mattered most to the apex predators of the Orion arm, the scent of truth. Here, in the heart of the capital world of Vraxos, the air was scrubbed of all pollutants, all background radiation, and all trivial odors, leaving only the sharp, metallic tang of pheromones and the heavy, suffocating weight of fear. High Archon Vrakthal sat upon the throne of bone, his massive, chitinous form rigid, his four-faceted eyes reflecting the dim, bioluminescent glow of the chamber's walls. He did not need to see his generals to know their unease. He could smell it. It drifted off them in waves, acrid, sour, a chemical betrayal of their warrior caste. The Kynar were the hunters of the void, a species evolved from solitary ambush predators who had conquered their own biosphere before turning their hunger toward the stars. They did not wage war in the conventional sense. They stalked civilizations. They identified weakness, they isolated the prey, and they struck when the throat was exposed. But today there was no talk of striking. Today the High Council smelled of prey, not predator. Vrakthal flared his mandibles, clicking them in a rhythm that demanded silence, though no one had spoken. The silence of the chamber was absolute, heavy enough to crush the lungs of a lesser species. In the center of the room, a holographic projection shimmered, not of light, but of reconstituted particulate matter, simulating the sensory signature of the target. It was a projection of a sector of space that had once been considered a backwater, a dead zone of little strategic value. Now it was the source of the rot that infected the Archon's sleep. The humans, the Terrans, the anomaly. General Korgeth, the fleetmaster of the Third Armada, stepped forward, his heavy power armor scraping against the obsidian floor. Korgeth was a legend among the Kynar, a warrior who had cracked the shells of the silicon mines and feasted on the marrow of the HFY Empire. But now Korgeth smelled of old sweat and trembling resolve. He did not look at the Archon, he looked at the projection of the Terran ships. "Report," Vrakthal commanded, his voice a low grind of tectonic plates. "And do not speak to me of visual data. Tell me what the sensors breathed." Korgeth hesitated, a pause that lasted a microsecond too long for a warrior of his stature. "High Archon," he began, his voice raspy, filtered through the translation vocoder that allowed them to speak the common trade tongues, though here they spoke the High Kynar dialect. "The scent, it is contradictory. We approached the perimeter of the Sol system 3 cycles ago. We engaged the stealth drives. We drifted in the solar wake, invisible to thermal scans, invisible to radar, invisible to gravimetric sensors. We were the shadow, we were the wind." And Vrakthal pressed, leaning forward, his dorsal spines rattling. "And they smelled us," Korgeth whispered, the admission landing like a physical blow in the center of the council. A ripple of uneasy shifting went through the assembled warlords. For a Kynar to be smelled before he struck was the ultimate failure. It reversed the cosmic order. "But that is not the worst of it, Archon. We deployed the sniffers, the quantum-entangled particulate sensors. We wanted to sample their atmosphere, their engine residue, the biological shedding of their crews. We expected the scent of prey, fear, disorganization, the soft, milky odor of a species that pleads for mercy." Korgeth paused, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly. "Instead, we found blood, ancient, dry, copper-rich blood, and underneath it, ash." Vrakthal slammed a fist onto the armrest of his throne, shattering a decorative crystal. "Explain. You speak in riddles like a shaman, not a fleetmaster. Blood implies they are wounded. Ash implies they are burned. Why have we not consumed them?" "Because the blood is not theirs," Korgeth said, his voice dropping to a terrifying register. "The scent profile of their vessels. It is saturated with the pheromones of extinction events. Not their extinction, others. We analyzed the hull alloys of their patrol craft. The metal itself retains the chemical memory of kinetic impacts that should have vaporized moons. They have coated their ships in the remnants of their enemies. But the underlying scent, Archon, it is pure, distilled aggression. But it is not the aggression of a hunter. It is the aggression of a cornered beast that has killed everything that ever entered its cage. We sniffed out human blood, yes, but it was the blood on their hands." The chamber fell silent again, the air growing colder. The Kynar understood the chemistry of violence better than any species in the galaxy. Violence was a language, and scent was its script. There were species that smelled of flight, herbivores who built fast ships to run. There were species that smelled of hive mind efficiency, sterile, acidic, dangerous, but predictable. But a species that smelled of blood on their hands, and ash, suggested something the Kynar had never encountered, a predator that did not hunt for food, but for elimination. We ran the simulations, Korgath continued, regaining some of his composure, though the sour smell of his anxiety remained. We fed the sensory data into the war minds. The logic engines screamed. They did not predict a victory. They predicted a mutual negation event. If we engage humanity in open combat, the chemical fallout suggests they will not surrender. They will not retreat. They will release pathogens. They will crack planetary crusts. They will burn the hyperlanes. They smell of a species that would rather burn the forest down than let the tiger stalk them. Vracthal sat back, the weight of the revelation settling into his marrow. This was the crisis that had paralyzed the Empire for a standard month. The humans had expanded into the fringe sectors, quiet, polite, efficient. They had not attacked Kynar ships. They had not raided Kynar outposts. They had simply existed, broadcasting standard diplomatic greetings on open channels. But the Kynar instincts, the biological imperative that had guided them for 10,000 years, screamed that this was a trap. You did not walk past a sleeping dragon without knowing it could wake. So we built the ships, Vracthal said softly. The monstrosities. Yes, Archon, Korgath nodded. We realized that to fight them is to invite the end, so we chose the strategy of the poisonous toad. We do not fight, we bloat, we posture. We look so terrifying, so jagged, so full of death that they will hesitate. We have constructed the Gorgon-class dreadnoughts. They are useless in a real warp maneuver fight. They are too heavy, too slow, their reactors prone to overheating if fired rapidly. But they are covered in spikes, in radiation emitters, in venting ports that spew toxic gas into the void. They are designed to trigger the flight response in any sane species. We have positioned them along the border. We are using dangerous ships to avoid combat. We are trying to scare the monster back into its cave. Vracthal looked at the hologram again. The human ships were small, sleek, geometric. They looked like surgical instruments compared to the jagged, organic horror of the Kynar fleet. And has it worked? The Archon asked. Have they fled? No, Korgath said, and for the first time Vracthal smelled true terror, the scent of a creature watching its own death approach. They have stopped. They have parked a single vessel in front of our entire blockade, and they are hailing us. They want to talk. The transition from the obsidian silence of the council chamber to the bridge of the Kynar flagship, the World Eater, was a shift from theoretical fear to visceral reality. The World Eater was the largest vessel ever constructed by the Ascendancy. It was a cathedral of intimidation, a mass of twisted durasteel and biometallic armor that spanned kilometers. It bristled with weapon ports that were largely inefficient but visually terrifying. It leaked hard radiation into the surrounding vacuum, a deliberate design flaw intended to scream danger to any sensor suite. It was a ship built by a species that believed fear was the ultimate weapon, and it was currently facing a ship that looked like a polished silver needle. Fleetmaster Korgath stood on the command deck, the panoramic viewports revealing the endless starfield of the border zone. In the distance, the human ship hung motionless. It was tiny, perhaps 1/100th the mass of the World Eater. It had no visible weapon ports, no glowing engine exhaust. It was simply there defying the logic of the blockade. The Kynar crew, normally disciplined and aggressive, moved with jerky, nervous motions. The bridge smelled of ozone and suppressed panic. The sensors were screaming, not because of what they detected, but because of what they didn't. The human ship was a void in the sensory data. It absorbed radar. It deflected scans. It was a ghost. Status of the intimidation field? Korgath barked, trying to inject authority into his voice. Field is active, Fleetmaster, the sensory officer replied, his claws clacking frantically on the console. We are broadcasting the screams of the vanquished on all frequencies. We are venting plasma from the forward tubes to simulate unstable reactor containment. We are projecting the thermal signature of a supernova event. Any standard species would have engaged warp drive and fled 3 cycles ago. And the human vessel. Stationary, their energy output is negligible. Fleetmaster, I cannot confirm they are even powered up. Wait, the officer froze. Incoming transmission, audio only, standard trade frequency. Korgath gripped the railing. This was it. The moment the prey realized the predator was too large to fight, he expected begging. He expected a desperate plea for non-aggression. He expected the stuttering of a terrified captain. Put it on speakers, maximum volume, let the crew hear their fear. The speakers crackled, a burst of static that cleared instantly into a voice. It was not a voice of fear. It was not a voice of aggression. It was a voice of such terrifying calmness, such absolute unwavering stability that it sounded artificial. But the Kynar audio analyzers confirmed it was biological. It was a male human voice, low, resonant, and polite. Kynar vessel identified as World Eater, the voice said. This is Captain Elias Thorne of the United Terran Coalition diplomatic cruiser Silent Vigil. We acknowledge your display. We interpret your venting of plasma and radiation as a sign of mechanical distress. Do you require assistance? Our engineers are standing by to help you stabilize your reactor core. We would hate to see such a magnificent construct damage itself due to a containment breach. The silence on the bridge of the World Eater was absolute. Korgath felt his mandibles slacken. They weren't afraid. They weren't intimidated. They thought the intimidation display was a malfunction, or Korgath's eyes narrowed, or they knew exactly what it was and they were mocking it. The insult was so profound, so alien, that for a moment the Kynar crew didn't know how to react. They mock us, a sub-commander growled, the scent of rage beginning to spike in the air. They dare to pity us. Fleetmaster, grant me permission to fire the main batteries. We will vaporize that silver splinter. Hold, Korgath roared. You smell only the surface. Breathe deeper, fool. He tapped the sensor logs. Look at their position. They are sitting exactly at the focal point of our main battery's convergence zone. If we fire, the energy overlap at that specific range would cause a feedback loop in our own targeting arrays. They haven't parked there by accident. They calculated the flaw in our firing solution to the millimeter. If we fire, we blow out our own sensors. They are not mocking us. They are demonstrating that they have already dissected our capabilities. The realization hit the bridge crew like a depressurization event. The humans hadn't just ignored the scary ship. They had analyzed it, found the inefficiencies built into it for the sake of intimidation, and positioned themselves in the one blind spot that rendered the weapons useless. Open a channel, Korgath said, his voice trembling with a mix of fury and respect. I will speak to this Captain Thorne. The screen flickered to life. The image that appeared was shocking in its simplicity. The human bridge was not a dark cavern of bones and shadows. It was bright, white, sterile. The humans wore simple blue uniforms, no armor, no exoskeletons. Captain Thorne sat in a chair that looked designed for comfort, not authority. He was a small creature by Kynar standards. Soft skin, no claws, binocular eyes that looked wet and fragile. But when he looked at the camera, Korgath felt a chill that no void cold could produce. It was the look of a scientist examining a bacteria sample. Captain Thorne, Korgath rumbled, his translation software turning his growls into the human trade tongue. You sit in the shadow of the World Eater. You offer insults disguised as aid. Do you not smell the death that radiates from this fleet? We are the Kynar. We have consumed stars. We have broken empires. Leave this sector or we will unmake you. Thorne didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He simply folded his hands in his lap. Fleetmaster, he replied, his tone conversational as if discussing the weather. We have analyzed your history, the Kynar ascendancy, and apex predator culture. You expand through intimidation. You prefer to win without fighting, using fear to break the morale of your opponents. It is a logical evolutionary strategy. It conserves resources. Why waste ammunition when a roar will suffice? We respect that efficiency. You respect it, Korgath asked, confused. Then you respect the threat. We respect the attempt, Thorne corrected gently. But there is a misunderstanding. You are projecting threat displays designed to trigger biological fear responses. You are venting radioactive isotopes and flashing high-yield energy signatures. To a prey species, this is terrifying. But Fleetmaster, humans are not a prey species. Thorne leaned forward slightly and the camera zoomed in. And we are not a predator species either. Predators hunt because they are hungry. Prey runs because it is afraid. We are neither. We are gardeners. And we have found that sometimes the garden has weeds that have thorns. We do not fear the thorns. We simply bring thick gloves. You call the World Eater a thorn? Korgath hissed. I could incinerate your ship in a microsecond. You could, Thorne agreed. But you won't, because your sensors have detected the blood on our hulls, haven't they? Why, you smell the entropy clinging to us. You know that if you destroy this ship, the signal will stop. And when the signal stops, the rest of us will come. And we won't bring diplomatic cruisers. We won't bring intimidation fleets. We don't build ships to look scary, Fleetmaster. We build ships to solve problems. And we are very, very good at problem solving. The threat was implicit, buried under layers of polite bureaucracy, but it was sharper than any blade. Korgath could smell the pheromones of the human captain through the advanced bioscanners. There was no adrenaline, no cortisol. There was only a steady, rhythmic production of dopamine and serotonin. The human was enjoying this. We wish to negotiate a border treaty, Thorn said, leaning back. We wish to trade. We have medical technologies your species lacks. You have raw materials we desire. There is no need for this posturing. But if you insist on maintaining this blockade, we will simply go around it. Space is three-dimensional, after all. Your wall is impressive, but it is a wall in an open field. Korgath severed the connection. He stood shaking in the center of the bridge. The logic was unassailable. The fear was reversed. The Kynar had built a fleet of monsters to avoid a fight, and the humans had looked at the monsters and seen only inefficiency. "Prepare the shuttle," Korgath ordered, his voice hollow. "I will go to them. I must smell them with my own senses. I must stand in their presence. If they are bluffing, I will tear this Captain Thorn apart with my own claws. If they are not, then the Ascendancy is already dead." The shuttle ride to the Silent Vigil was a journey into the uncanny valley. The Kynar shuttle, a jagged splinter of iron and engine grease, docked with the smooth, seamless hull of the human ship. The airlock cycled with a hiss that sounded too clean, too precise. When the inner door opened, Korgath and his honor guard of 4 Praetorian hunters stepped into a corridor that smelled of nothing. To a Kynar, a lack of smell was disorienting. Every Kynar ship smelled of the pack, of oil, of meat, of rank hierarchy. This human ship smelled of recycled air and lemon-scented cleaning agents. It was sterile. It was the scent of a hospital or a morgue. Captain Thorn was waiting for them in a conference room that featured a large table made of real wood, a display of wealth that staggered Korgath. Wood was organic, rare in space. To use it for furniture implied a connection to a homeworld that was lush, preserved, and cherished. "Welcome aboard," Thorn said. He was standing unarmed, flanked by 2 other humans, a female holding a datapad and a large male who stood with his hands clasped behind his back. The large male was the only one who triggered Korgath's threat assessment. He was big, dense with muscle, and his eyes scanned the Kynar with the precision of a targeting laser. A soldier, but he wore no weapon. Korgath towered over Thorn. The Kynar were 7 feet of chitin and muscle. Thorn was barely 6 feet of soft flesh. Korgath flared his scent glands, releasing a wave of dominance pheromones, a chemical shout that would have made a lesser Kynar kneel. Thorn didn't even sniff. He gestured to the chairs. "Please, the chairs are reinforced to support your mass. We prepared the environmental controls to match your preferred humidity, though we kept the temperature a few degrees lower to prevent bacterial growth. I hope that is acceptable." Korgath sat, the wood creaking slightly. "You resist the scent of dominance," Korgath growled. "You have no olfactory organs worth the name." "We smell with our machines," Thorn said, tapping the table. "My sensors tell me you are releasing high levels of androstenol and various stress hormones. You are trying to assert authority. It is a biological imperative for your species. We understand. In our past, we had similar instincts. We beat our chests, we roared, we painted our faces." "Your past?" Korgath narrowed his eyes. "You speak as if you have evolved beyond violence, yet my sensors smell the blood on your history. You cannot hide it. You smell of genocide." Thorn's expression changed. The polite smile vanished, replaced by a somber gravity that seemed to darken the bright room. "We do not hide it, Fleetmaster. We carry it. That is the difference between us. You wear your capacity for violence on your hull in spikes and radiation. You want everyone to know you can kill. We keep our capacity for violence inside, locked away, because we know what happens when we let it out." The human pressed a button on the table and a hologram appeared. It wasn't a star map. It was a historical archive. Footage played, grainy, violent, horrifying. It showed humans fighting humans, kinetic bombardments, nuclear fire, trenches filled with bodies. It showed a planet consuming itself in a frenzy of hate. "We almost died," Thorn said softly. "Not from aliens, from ourselves. We are the Apex P. Redators of our world, Fleetmaster. We hunted the mammoths to extinction with pointed sticks. We turned the atom against our own cities. We are not peaceful by nature. We are peaceful by discipline." Korgath watched the footage, mesmerizing in its brutality. The Kynar fought for territory, for dominance. The humans in the footage seemed to fight for ideas, for abstract concepts, and they fought with a savagery that made Korgath's stomach turn. "We sniffed the blood," Korgath whispered. "We thought it was the blood of others." "It is our own," Thorn said, "and the blood of those who tried to exterminate us later. We learned a hard lesson, Kynar. We learned that war is not a tool of policy. It is a failure of reason, but we also learned how to win it. We built the Silent Vigil not to fight you, but to study you, to see if you could be reasoned with, because if you couldn't." Thorn let the sentence hang. If we couldn't, Korgeth asked, his voice low. Then we would have to unleash the things we keep in the dark, Thorn said. And we really don't want to do that. You built your dangerous ships to avoid combat because you fear defeat. We build our diplomatic ships to avoid combat because we fear what we would do in victory. We don't want to wipe you out, Fleetmaster. We don't want to be that species anymore. The psychological weight of the statement crushed the air in the room. Korgeth realized the fundamental error of the Kynar strategy. They were a species of bullies, puffing themselves up to look big. The humans were a species of rehabilitated monsters, desperately trying to stay civilized. The Kynar were playing at being dangerous. The humans were dangerous, and they were the only ones holding the leash. Korgeth started, struggling to find the words. We did not know. Now you do, Thorn said, the warmth returning to his voice. So let us talk about trade. We have a surplus of agricultural synthesis units. You have high-grade dilithium in your asteroid belts. A fair exchange. The negotiations were tense but productive. Korgeth found himself disarmed not by weapons but by logic. The humans were fair, brutally fair. They did not cheat. They did not posture. They simply laid out the facts and expected rational agreement. It was a mode of diplomacy the Kynar had never encountered. In the Ascendancy, diplomacy was just war by other means. Here it was actually cooperation. But the universe, as the Kynar knew, did not tolerate peace for long. The alarm on the silent vigil was not a siren. It was a soft, pulsating chime. Thorn tapped his earpiece, his face going rigid. Report. Captain, the voice of the tactical officer came over the speakers, audible to the Kynar. Gravimetric shear detected. Sector 7. Behind the Kynar blockade, something is punching through. It's not a ship, it's a tier. Korgeth stood up, his instincts screaming. Sector 7, that is the heart of the blockade line. My ships are there. Not anymore, Thorn said, swiping the hologram to a tactical view. The view showed the Kynar fleet, the massive, spiky, terrifying Gorgon-class dreadnoughts, and behind them space was unzipping. A rift of purple and black energy was tearing the void apart. From the rift, shapes were emerging, not ships, biological entities. Massive, crystalline void swimmers the size of moons, the Shard-Eaters. Korgeth gasped. The myths, the old devourers, we thought they were legend. They are real, Thorn said, his voice flat. And they feed on high-energy radiation. Your ships. Your dangerous ships. They are leaking radiation as an intimidation tactic. You just lit a dinner bell for the worst swarm in the galaxy. The Kynar fleet was in chaos. The Gorgon dreadnoughts, designed to look scary, were sluggish. Their weapons, tuned for visual impact, were bouncing harmlessly off the crystalline hides of the Shard-Eaters. The monsters were latching onto the Kynar ships, draining their reactors, tearing through the hulls to get to the juicy radioactive cores. My crews, Korgeth roared. They are being slaughtered. We must return. The World Eater has the firepower to. The World Eater is a slow, bloated target, Thorn cut him off. If you engage them with that ship, they will swarm it and drain it dry in minutes. Your intimidation tactics have attracted a predator that doesn't feel fear, only hunger. Then we die, Korgeth said, slumping. We die as warriors. No, Thorn said, standing up. He looked at the large human soldier. Commander Vance, unlock the protocol. The soldier nodded. Protocol Omega authorized, sir. Thorn turned to Korgeth. Fleetmaster, you are about to see why we don't carry our weapons on the outside. Get your ships to scatter. Turn off your radiation emitters. Go cold. Silent running, now. But the monsters. We will handle the monsters. Go. Korgeth barked the orders into his comms. On the screen, the Kynar fleet began to scatter, powering down the noisy, leaking reactors, drifting like debris. The Shard-Eaters, confused by the sudden loss of the scent, thrashed in the void. Then the silent vigil moved. It didn't fire a laser, it didn't launch a missile. The small, silver ship accelerated toward the rift with impossible speed. As it flew, panels on its hull slid open, not gun ports, projectors. What are you doing? Korgeth watched the screen, mesmerized. The Shard-Eaters are resonance-based life forms, Thorn explained, his eyes glued to the data stream. They communicate through high-frequency vibration. They navigate by sensing atomic decay. We are not going to shoot them. We are going to scream at them. The silent vigil positioned itself between the scattering Kynar fleet and the rift. The projectors lit up, pulsing with a pale blue light. Activate the Banshee array, Thorn ordered. In the vacuum of space, there is no sound. But the silent vigil wasn't transmitting sound waves. It was transmitting a gravitational shear wave, a ripple in the fabric of spacetime itself, modulated to the exact frequency of a dying star. To the sensors of the Kynar, it looked like the entire sector momentarily distorted. To the Shard-Eaters, it must have been the equivalent of a sonic boom point-blank in the ear. The crystalline monsters recoiled, their formations shattering. The sheer intensity of the scream overloaded their sensory organs. They writhed, disoriented, blind. "Target the rift," Thorne said. "Launch the anchor." From the belly of the diplomatic ship, a single cylinder fired. It wasn't an explosive. It flew into the center of the purple tier and detonated. But instead of fire, it released a pulse of localized static physics, a reality anchor. It forced the laws of physics in that area to harden to become rigid. The tier in space, unable to sustain its instability against the enforced order, snapped shut. Severed from their dimension, the Shard-Eaters began to crystallize fully, turning into inert statues of ice and diamond, floating harmlessly in the dark. The entire engagement had taken 3 minutes. Korgath stared at the screen. The Kynar Armada, the dangerous ships, had been useless. The small, polite human ship had ended a cosmic threat with a shout and a paperweight. "You," Korgath whispered, "you weaponized physics." "We weaponized math," Thorne corrected, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Calculated resonance. We didn't kill them, technically. We just shut the door and turned off the lights. They'll drift until they hibernate." He turned to Korgath. "This is why we avoid combat, Fleetmaster. Because when we fight, we don't fight with glory, we don't fight with honor. We fight with the fundamental constants of the universe, and that is too dangerous to use over a border dispute." The return to the World Eater was a somber affair. The Kynar crews were alive, but their worldview had been shattered. They had spent centuries building ships that looked like nightmares, only to be saved by a ship that looked like a daydream. Korgath stood once again in the obsidian rotunda, but this time the atmosphere was different. The High Archon Vrakthal was not sitting on his throne of bone. He was standing, looking at the data logs Korgath had brought back. "They saved us," Vrakthal said, the scent of confusion heavy in the room. "They saved the fleet that was sent to imprison them." "They did," Korgath said. "They called themselves Gardener's Archon. They said they pull weeds." "And the blood," Vrakthal asked. "The scent of blood you detected." Korgath looked at the holographic recording of the silent vigil shutting the rift. "I understand it now. It was not the scent of a murderer. It was the scent of a surgeon. A surgeon is covered in blood, but he cuts to save, not to kill. We are hunters, Archon. We kill to eat. They kill to protect. That is a far more terrifying thing." "Why terrifying?" "Because a hunter can be sated," Korgath said, looking out into the stars. "A hunter eats his fill and sleeps, but a protector, a guardian, their work is never done, they never sleep, they are always watching." The Kynar Ascendancy signed the Treaty of Saul 3 days later. They dismantled the intimidation emitters on their ships. They stopped trying to look dangerous. They didn't need to. They had made an alliance with the humans. And in the deep void, as the Kynar ships patrolled alongside the sleek silver vessels of Earth, the other races of the galaxy began to notice a change in the scent of the Orion arm. It no longer smelled of fear. It no longer smelled of the predatory hunger of the Kynar. It smelled of ozone, coffee, and the quiet, terrifying certainty of a species that had looked into the abyss, blinked, and then built a bridge over it. Years later, Korgath, now retired from the fleet and serving as an ambassador to Earth, sat in a park in Geneva. He watched human children playing. They ran, they screamed, they wrestled. They were small, soft, and fragile. A Kynar child could snap them in half. But Korgath watched them with a deep, reverent fear. He saw a boy trip another boy, pushing him into the mud. The fallen boy cried. The other children laughed. Then a third child stepped in. A small girl. She didn't hit the bully. She didn't scream. She simply stood between the bully and the fallen boy, crossing her arms, staring with a calm, icy glare that silenced the laughter instantly. She helped the boy up, brushed him off, and stared the bully down until he retreated. Korgath inhaled the scent of the park. Cut grass, rain, and underneath it all that faint metallic tang. The scent of the antibody. The Kynar had used dangerous ships to avoid combat. The humans used dangerous hearts to ensure that combat, when it came, was the last one that would ever be necessary. The galaxy was a dark forest, filled with predators, but for the first time in history, the Kynar didn't mind walking through it. because they were walking with the monster that had decided to be good. And nothing, absolutely nothing, scared the nightmares more than that.